Thanks so much for joining us on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. We're going to get to today's episode in a minute, but first, I want to tell you about the Art of Leadership Academy. Imagine being a church leader and not just guessing about your next steps in leadership. Imagine breaking through your personal and church growth barriers. Imagine getting unlimited access to all of my premium courses and those of other leaders. Imagine having a community that's coaching you and connecting with over 1,300 leaders who are leading growing churches from across the country and around the world. And all of that for less than the price of attending a conference or even hiring a consultant. All that is yours in the Art of Leadership Academy. Click the link to check it out. Hope to see you inside. And now to today's episode. Lysa, welcome back. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. It's always a joy to spend a few minutes with you on your podcast. Such an honor. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you. And, I think this is maybe the third time or the fourth time that you've been a guest on the podcast, but so much has happened since we were last together here. So to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, can you give us a little update on what's taken place over the last couple of years, and just to let people who track with you, because so many people do, know what's happened?
Yeah. So I think for those of your listeners that have followed along with my journey, which has been pretty public because, I lead a public life. And so that's just part of it. But I had some pretty significant devastations that occurred in my marriage, and fought really hard for many years to save the marriage. And I'm a big believer in marriage, and I was married 30 years and it meant so much to me. It was definitely my most significant human relationship and one that I never saw ending. But heartbreakingly, my marriage did end. And instead of calling it a divorce, I call it the death of my marriage, because that's how deep the grief was. It was really a death in my life. And so when I no longer was working on the marriage after it died, then I was free to work on myself, and I needed to work on myself. And so the past several years, I have been doing a lot of work, both from a theological standpoint and a therapeutic standpoint, to make sure that I heal, that I recognize what I need to recognize about myself. And part of that is what led me to want to write a book on boundaries and goodbyes. I realized I'm not good at either one. So I definitely wrote this book from my point of struggle, not strength. But what I was learning, it was so important, and I've seen it transform some really important relationships in my life for the better. And so I felt like I wanted to give this information and really revelation to other people.
Yeah. And, in some of your previous books and then in the new book, and was it Good Boundaries and Goodbye? Is that it?
Yes.
It is the title, which is, I remember you telling me the title a number of months ago, and I'm like, oh, that's a good title. Like, it's a great title, Lysa. But you go through just in a lot of detail, just how agonizing it was. And as we talked about in a previous episode, it's a different perspective in this book, but looking back on the cancer you had and then the surgery that you had, like you said, this kind of angst almost killed you. Like literally, you link it in this book between the psychological, the emotional pain and the physical pain. And your doctor said this almost killed you. How did you, I'm asking this question because so many people listening are leading through pain. They're leading through personal pain, maybe the death of their marriage, maybe a struggle with a child, maybe some inner stuff from childhood that they're working through. And certainly the last 3 years, everybody has led through crisis, never ending crisis. And Proverbs 31 is a huge organization. Like, we've been together in person. I met some of your team. And I don't think people know how big your audience is or how responsible you are as a boss and a CEO. but I want to know, how did you lead your organization while you were going through all of this? Because it seems almost impossible.
Well, there were seasons that I didn't. There were seasons I took a step back. And I also realized that I needed to be absolutely honest with myself about what I could do and what I couldn't do, and what I had to give and what I did not have to give. And I started transitioning some key leaders to be able to fill the gaps when I may need to, take a step back. And there were different seasons where I just had to have a break. But also, I always had this perspective too. I didn't have to continue in ministry. I felt the desire to continue ministry. And part of the reason is because leading from that messy middle, or even helping other people from the messy middle, is really where we're all at all the time in life, to different degrees of severity. And that's where people live. People live in the middle of their issues and problems. And so, I did what I felt like was healthy and appropriate, but I also gave myself a lot of grace in the process.
If we can break that down a little bit, I wouldn't mind looking at some of the things you delegated, because I mean, you are, like a lot of our listeners right now, particularly those who work in the church, you're sort of, as they say, the face with the place. Like when people think of Proverbs 31, they think of you, Lysa, right? So there's probably the pressure to continue your speaking, podcasting, writing, whether that's books or even, you have a massive email list. You do conferences and events. So you're familiar with the pressure to, quote, show up. What do you do when you are the visible communicator, or I know you're not the only one, but when you're the most visible, when you're the person associated with that, how do you determine what to pull back from and what to stay with?
Great question. So just because I can do something doesn't mean that I'm the only one who can do something. But then there are other things where, only I can do this particular thing. And so I took that consideration. What are some things that I'm doing that other people could be doing equally as good and maybe even better? So I kind of listed out some of those things. In the middle, what are some things that only I bring to the table? I listed those things out. And then this other consideration was, what makes me fulfilled as a leader? Because I don't want to live from an empty place. I want to live where part of my job is costing me something, but part of my job is breathing life back into me. And so I listed out these things that I really, really enjoyed, and then these things that kind of seemed to suck the life out of me. And
go ahead, keep going, because I got other questions.
Then I started doing this thing called a global calendar, where I sit down the fall before the next year and I look at everything that's happening the next year. And before a bunch of things get added to my calendar, I block my personal time first. Then I block out time for those activities that breathe life into me as a leader. Then I let go of those things. I make the conscious choice to let go or delegate those things that other people could do equally or even better than me. And then the things that only I can do, then I list out the responsibilities that come with that chunk of task, and we get it all scheduled so that I don't have this awkward tension of letting life just eat away at my calendar. I take my calendar and build my life.
I started a version of the global calendar a few years ago where I don't accept speaking engagements more than 6 months in advance into a new year. It just got, the next 2 years were mortgaged before we even got to them.
Right.
And that's so life-giving, blocking personal time. But I haven't taken it as far as you have. I think that's a really interesting practice, Lysa, of like taking that life-giving list, and that's probably a clue to what you're uniquely gifted for, right? If it's giving you energy, it's probably your, people call it a superpower. It's how God gifted you. It's what wired you. And you map that out. How do you do that? Like, do you just say, okay, I'm going to write another book, and therefore, March, April, May are going to be book writing or research, or like, can you break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'm always working on writing because that falls into the category of only I can write the content that comes from me. And it's really important. My content feeds a lot of what happens in all the areas of the ministry. And I made the decision that it was crucial for me to be the writer. And then I needed to find people to hire who could maximize my writing so I wasn't duplicating my efforts. So, what that looks like is I will give maybe I'll write a devotion. And from that devotion, the social media team has different parts that they can pull for what they've got going on. And other teams can use this verbiage for other initiatives so that content gets maximized. But my book writing process is 6 months of research, 6 months of writing, 6 months of editing and writing the Bible study, and then 6 months of prepping for release. So I'm always kind of in that mode. But here's the thing that was even more important than figuring out how to schedule the things I love. The things I love, they don't feel like burdens on my schedule, so those are easy to write in. But I had to find what are those things that are like fire ants in my schedule that just really I cannot stand. I just can't stand it. And so I did something pretty unconventional and I quit email. I just found that email drove me nuts. I was in a bad mood every time I opened my email. And I was just curious, what if I quit email? Is the world going to stop? Is the ministry going to fall apart? Am I going to lose out on every opportunity? But here's what I found is the world didn't end. The ministry didn't stop. It actually continued to grow. And people figured it out. And so when I quit email, it wasn't like a big meeting that I had. I just quit. And my team figured out that it was good to set up a meeting. And so we call it I don't remember what we call it actually. It's just our planning meeting where the team gets together. And when people figured out they could no longer email me, they emailed different people on the team. And it was better for me than staring at a whole list of emails to have the team come together, and it maximized my efforts. So my team that's around me, instead of me having to email this person and say, let me check with this person, and oh, I don't know about this, so let me first find out about that. That just wears me out. And then you've got this long chain of emails and you're trying to figure it all out, and it's just too much. So we get together about every week and a half, 2 weeks, and the team just gets together and they have all the requests and we just talk through it, and it maximizes the time. It takes us about an hour, and that gets me through 2 weeks worth of requests in an hour because everybody's there. Everybody puts their mind on it, and it just works. And I quit email and I lived through it, lived to tell about it, happier for it.
That's so good. We banned email in our company too. You're not allowed to email another team member. There's a third party from the outside you can jump on it, but you're not allowed to. I cannot email my assistant. And it's really life-giving. We can go into that another day. What are some other things, that were on your, I don't love doing this list? Just to give us an idea of what you gave yourself permission to get out of.
I don't like long meetings. Mm-hmm. I really don't. And I when I look at my calendar and there's a bunch of meetings on it, I start to get this feeling of, this week has so many meetings, I love the people I work with and I love interacting with them, but I just really don't love meetings. And yet Proverbs 31 is a big enough organization where it's becoming more and more important to have some pretty big meetings on a regular basis. especially business meetings and strategic meetings and all of that. So I decided to delegate the role of CEO to one of our executive directors. And so I am now the CVO of Proverbs 31 Ministries, Chief Visionary Officer and President. So I'm still the boss. The buck still stops with me, but I no longer have to attend all the business meetings. Instead, there's a quarterly big business meeting that I attend. And other than that, the CEO keeps me well versed and informed. And she and I will have phone calls and meetups where we talk about anything crucial that she needs to navigate according to the vision of the organization. But then I've just turned her loose to run the business side of it. And I'm so much happier.
Was that hard to let go of, to appoint someone else CEO of the organization you started?
No, it wasn't hard for me to let go of that because, first of all, my identity is not tied to that position. And that position demands certain activities that I can do, but they just don't breathe life into me. And I felt like another person could do it and do it with even more enthusiasm than me. And that position deserved more enthusiasm than what I was bringing to it. And I think it's been great. So I didn't really struggle with it, but I think it's because I was able to be honest with myself and aware enough to know I'm 53 years old and I've reached an age and stage in my life where I want to do what only I can do so that I feel like I have the greatest impact. So, yeah.
Hmm. If you don't mind, because I also do not like long meetings, but I'm curious, what would go on inside you when you were in a meeting that was too long? I think a lot of leaders can probably relate to that. What would happen inside Lysa?
Well, I would feel the pressure to insert my voice and something really intelligent in a meeting just so I could keep my brain there, because otherwise my brain was just going all these different places of all the other stuff that I could be
Yeah.
doing, should be doing, needed to be doing. And so I found that I was just trying so hard to insert something to prove that I was still a good leader, but that just added time to the meeting that, sometimes, sometimes it was good, but sometimes it just wasn't necessary. And so I found it's much more valuable for me and the CEO, the new CEO, to have those conversations where I insert anything that needs to be inserted, but I also have the freedom to make it a 10-minute conversation rather than a 2-hour meeting. And then I'm able to add what's absolutely necessary and no more. And I think that works. And also, what was happening inside of me is a sense of dread. When I look at my calendar and there's just too many meetings focused on too much of the business side of running the ministry, I just start to have this sense of dread, and I don't like that feeling. Now, obviously, I have responsibilities that don't particularly excite me, but I need to be responsible with those. But not everything I was putting on my calendar needed to be my responsibility. And it was good for me to pay attention to that sense of dread.
How would the people at Proverbs 31, your coworkers, say things are going since you've made those changes?
Well, we could bring them in and you could ask them.
I heard Meredith was in the room. Ask Shay what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that they would say it's going well because Meredith is actually the new CEO, Meredith Brock.
Oh, awesome.
And she is just in her element. She just really is. And I'm in my element. And I think it has provided for more stability and more vision for the future and longer range planning, which is absolutely crucial in this season of what we're calling dual transformation. Meredith read a really good business book called Dual Transformation, and that is being honest about where the dollars in your organization are having the greatest impact, and being honest where something is a legacy project, but maybe it's not having the impact that it needed to. So you have to free up time and resources from the lesser impact things, so that you can identify the new growth engine to carry your organization into this next season. And there's been so many market disruptors, even in ministry, maybe especially in ministry.
Mhm.
And we have to pay attention to those. And Meredith is able to give her full attention to all of that, which provides a bigger and stronger ability to not get caught in the downward flow of what can happen if you keep doing things the same way, but rather revamp and re-energize and identify new growth engines. And we've done that, and I love it. And that in and of itself brings life to me.
Yeah, that, and we're going to get to boundaries and goodbyes, but that is worth camping on, because I think, when you look at the disruption of 2020, 2021, a lot of churches and a lot of businesses just snapped back to the way it was in 2019, and they were shocked to realize it doesn't work. And I was telling you before we hit record, we just came off our fall retreat as a staff, and we redirected our focus. We actually are shutting down a couple of things that we have done for a long time that you would call, legacy initiatives that we've had. And I remember, our mutual friend Reggie Joyner told me years ago, it doesn't take a leader to kill something that's dead. It takes a leader to kill something that's good. And I think that's true. That can be hard for leaders. And I just want you to say more about that, I guess, but that can be really hard for leaders, particularly, I imagine some of those things that were legacy programs were your idea, Lysa, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the time frame was. What is the process for you as a leader to sort of pronounce something dead or no longer helpful, when maybe it was your idea or it really served you well for a season? Like, what does it take inside your organization to do that?
Well, first of all, I think sometimes maybe that move needs to be swift, but most of the time, I would encourage leaders to take steps, not leaps, so that you can manage other people's emotion around changes, because change can create a whiplash effect that some people will not be able to handle within the staff or even within the audience that you're reaching. And so take steps, not leaps. Be honest about resources. You have limited resources, not because you're a bad organization, but because you're an organization that has limited resources,
Mhm.
And so you need to be honest with that and recognize you're going to have to identify with the disruptors that are in the marketplace. You're going to have to identify your new growth engine. And the new growth engine is going to look different than some of the legacy projects. It has to look different, not just because we went through COVID, but because of the skepticism that people developed during COVID. And we would be wise to just get brutally honest with where people are at. And, people right now are at a more skeptical place of churches and religious organizations. They are tired of being taught what they should do, and they're considering now what they could do. And so when we paid attention to those kind of disruptors and those kinds of skepticisms, one of our new growth engines is a podcast that we decided to shift resources toward, and it has served us really well. And the podcast is Therapy and Theology. And paying attention to the disruptors, our tagline for Therapy and Theology, for just to give people a vision of what we're offering in therapy and theology, because the title is pretty apparent what we're offering. But paying attention to people's skepticism, our tagline is, we're not going to tell you what to think. We're going to give you a lot to think about.
Ooh.
And so that shift is paying attention to the skepticism of people today and letting them know you have the freedom to come to your own conclusions. We're going to educate you, though. So we're not going to tell you what to think. We're going to give you a lot to think about. And that seems to fit where people are at considering the disruptors that they've experienced and the disruptors we've experienced too.
Is there an example of something you used to do that you're like, yeah, it's just not getting the same mileage anymore?
Well, I think there's several over the history of Proverbs, there's been several things that we've had to kill, but then there's been other things we've had to revamp and do it a different way. So, I would have told you 15 years ago, the two biggest areas of our ministry were the radio show and the magazine. Well, we no longer have a magazine. We transitioned those resources to social media. We no longer have a radio show. We transitioned those resources to a podcast. And so, that was us getting honest with where people are at, how people like to consume information. And instead of trying to retrain society to stay with what you have always done, we've got to stay authentic to solid Bible teaching for us and authentic to what we're offering. But we've got to be honest about how we're delivering that, because people are consuming information, they're consuming teaching, they're consuming instruction in a completely different way than they used to. And so that's important.
How do you pay attention to that? Like, where do you get your insights as to where momentum is gathering, where it might be? Because you can look at it, okay, the air is coming out of the radio balloon or out of the magazine or whatever. You can look at declining numbers, but it's not as intuitive to know, oh, and we should go here. Or, because you've been podcasting for a while, like, how did you determine, oh, we're not going to tell you what to think, we're going to give you a lot to think about. How do you determine that was the thing that was going to carry you the next 10 yards down the field, so to speak?
Well, we decided to invest in making this a person's full-time job. So this is what she does. And it is one of the best investments we've ever made. Is she pays attention every single day to measuring everything. Then she puts those measurements together in a report, and she brings that report and educates everyone. This is how the audience reacted, and these are the metrics, and this is what it's telling us. And so once she gets those metrics, even before she presents them to the larger staff, she has a strategy team meeting where our social media gal comes, our head of our creative department comes, that includes our podcast department, and a few other strategic people, but they lead a strategy team. So she is analyzing this not void of departmental information, but with the department heads so that they can make a really good report to the leaders of Proverbs so that we can make very strategic and very nimble real-time decisions. So I can call my team any given day and I can say, how did this post perform, and what is that telling us? And they can give me that information at the drop of a hat because it's somebody's full-time job. And it's not just metrics around social media, it's metrics around every aspect of the ministry.
That's really interesting. So that raises another question in my mind, which is, on the one hand, you have what your audience is telling you, what the metrics are telling you. On the other hand, you've got your gut as a leader, or where you think you should go. We debated this on our team. I have a particular style. I'm not in on the latest Instagram trends. I never did TikTok dances. Where do you draw the line at, oh, Lysa, we need to get you doing TikTok dances on TikTok? Like, how do you navigate that tension as a leader, trying to be true to who you are, but also listening to the numbers?
Yeah, I don't do TikTok dances either.
I didn't think you did. I'd never seen one.
No, but you can, my team has gotten really good about taking my content and helping me to do some reels that are very in line and in keeping with the content that I'm writing. And so a big part of a lot of the publicity around good boundaries and goodbyes is, instead of saying, oh, I don't do Instagram reels, saying, let's try it. And those have been the posts that have actually performed the very best and connected people to the book in an even deeper way. But it's true to who I am. It's not a dance.
Right.
It's true to the content that's being created. And so, yeah, I think that's really important.
So I'm reading through Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, and it's written very much one-to-one, personal. This is how you deal with it in a relationship, in friendship, in life. But I'm also reading it through a leadership lens going, I don't think leaders have very good boundaries. Can you give us some examples of when boundaries fail us as people and in leadership? And then that'll sort of launch us into a conversation around that I think will be really helpful to leaders.
Yeah, great question. So healthy boundaries don't fail us. Healthy boundaries actually help us communicate three important things. This is what I have to give and what I don't have to give. This is what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. This is what I will tolerate and what I will not tolerate. So those three things are very, very important. And when we combine that with a realistic understanding of our capacity in all the different areas of our life in this season of life, based on the responsibilities that are set in cement, then it allows me to make better informed decisions around boundaries. Boundaries are not something we put on other people. Boundaries are something we put on ourselves to remain self-controlled. And we have to understand that the purpose of the boundary is from a place of love. So we want to, just like the subtitle of the book says, we want to love others well without losing the best of who we are. So I'm going to flip the interview on you for a second.
Okay.
And I'm going to prove to you you're already doing this really well. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Do you have a bank account?
I do.
Do you have a security passcode on your bank account?
Yes, I do.
Do you think it would be wise right now for you to share with all of your listeners information how they could have complete access to your bank account, including the security password?
Yeah, not wise. Not wise. Do not share this with anyone, I think the bank says.
Okay. So is that because you're unkind?
Yeah, no.
Is it because you're a selfish leader?
I hope not. No.
Is it because you're unchristian?
No. We give out of that account.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have limited resources in your account, right? And if you give everyone free access to those limited resources without making sure they can be completely responsible with that kind of access, then you'll go bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
So we know this so well with our bank account. We just forget it with other areas of limited capacity in our life. We have limited emotional capacity. We have limited time capacity. We have limited relational capacity, and on and on and on. You see, to the level that we give someone access to us, we have to make sure that to give that kind of access, that they will bring that level of responsibility. Where the tension often happens for a leader is they give level 10 access, but that person that given level 10 access to, they're only bringing level 3 responsibility. And the difference there is where dysfunction grows and where there's a need for a boundary. So in the mistake I've made in the past as a leader is I've tried to put boundaries on this other person to try to force them to raise their level of responsibility up to the level of access that I've given them. But we can't control another person or force them to change if they're unwilling or incapable. So I have to put a boundary on myself. And doing that means that I reduce the level 10 access down to level 3, because that's their level, that other person's level of demonstrated responsibility. So access and responsibility are two very crucial words that have really changed the way I look at boundaries. Boundaries are an effective communication tool. They're not to shove others away. They are to help us stay self-controlled and keep the best of who we are operating front and center.
That's such a helpful analogy, the bank password analogy. And I loved it when I read it in the book. And that got me, thinking. So take a look at the growth of an organization. So Proverbs 31 probably started at a keyboard with you and an idea. Fair? That's how it
Fair.
started. And then you hired an assistant. Then I don't know the exact history, but it's a pretty familiar pattern. And you had 12 readers to start, right? Well, access is pretty easy then. It's like, I emailed Lysa. She emailed me back. She gave me her cell number. We talked. We had a conversation. That's how almost everybody starts. And the same is true in church leadership and corporate leadership. If you're a startup, you want access. And, in church leader world, all the barriers between 200 and 1,000 in attendance are about access. There are other barriers, but it's like the people you started with are like, how come you don't visit anymore? How come you don't do pastoral care? How come this person was in the hospital? And, the answer to that is you can't. You can't care for 200 people the way you care for 20. You can't care for 1,000 people the way you care for 10. You just can't. And you had that at Proverbs 31 too, right? Now you don't do email. So if you email Lysa, you're not going to get a response. Help leaders understand the different phases of providing that access, because I think that is one of the hardest aspects of scaling anything. And I ended up, I had to figure it out, and I was helped by some really good books along the way. But you kind of feel guilty. You kind of feel like a bad person. You feel like, oh, I should be there for that person. They're sick. They had a heart attack. But we scaled pastoral care through small groups, et cetera, et cetera. So talk us through that. How do you get over the guilt and the weird emotions that come with drawing boundaries as you grow?
Well, one thing that I think can trip leaders up is that Bible verses have been weaponized against boundary setting that make us feel really guilty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of those is, well, Jesus laid down his life for his friends. Like, are you not willing to lay down your life for other people? And Jesus did lay down his life for a high and holy purpose. He did not lay down his life to enable bad behavior to continue. So healthy people respect healthy boundaries. If you draw a healthy boundary and someone doesn't respect it, that's more on their misplaced expectations than it is on your irresponsibility. You're not trying to be irresponsible, you're trying to be realistic. And so I think it's important for us to define that just because someone else has an unhealthy perspective of the kind of access they should have on, to you, or an unrealistic expectation of you, that doesn't make you a bad person that should induce guilt. Sometimes it just is what it is. So here's where I would get in trouble, Carey, is that I would say, well, I struggle with people pleasing. Okay. As I dug around in that, I started to realize I wasn't people pleasing just to keep other people happy. I was people pleasing to keep them happy so that they wouldn't take from me what I feared they might take from me if I didn't say yes to them. So, and I felt I might not be okay if they took that away from me.
And what was that? What was that you were afraid they were going to take away from you?
Their support, their acceptance, their willingness to help me out the next time I needed to be helped out, their approval, so many things, But if I'm living in fear that if I draw a healthy boundary, this person may walk away from me, chances are that person's eventually going to walk away. So it's better to draw the boundary and communicate what is and is not realistic. It's better to do that than to get in this weird dysfunctional dance of avoiding that person, which will absolutely make them want to walk away because they don't understand what's going on. So it's so much better to have that clarity of saying, dear Sally, thank you so much for your request. That means a lot to me that you would want to blah, blah, blah with me. While my heart says yes, 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 the reality of my time makes this a no. Thank you for understanding my need for realistic constraints or paying attention to the realistic constraints of my time. Now, if Sally is a healthy person, Sally is going to recognize she also has a limited capacity and she will appreciate your limited capacity. But if Sally is an unhealthy person has never met a boundary that they like. And so somebody else's health is not yours to manage. Your health is what is yours to manage. And mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs. Sometimes as leaders, we get into a bad place with our mental health because we stop being committed to reality.
Boy, there's a lot there. I'm taking notes. What do you do when somebody interprets your placing of a boundary? No, you're going to say it a lot nicer than I'm going to say it now, but like, no, we're not going to have that meeting. No, I'm not going to do your event. No, I'm not going to go to the hospital. No, I'm not going to come to that thing you're doing. A lot of people tend to, and I think you're right, it's the unhealthy ones. They take it as rejection. They think that they have unlimited access to you. And whole churches have been trained that way, to think that way, by the way, which is another issue for another day. How do you deal with that when they see that as rejection, when they take it personally?
Well, you could be very, very gracious in how you say it. And, ask yourself, okay, I can't do this, but what can I do? For example, if somebody is in the hospital and they've been, a committed member to your church, and do you realistically have a few minutes to stop by the hospital? You probably do. But if you don't have that, if it really is not realistic to stop by and it's going to start tipping your capacity over into the danger zone, but you still feel like I need to do something, then ask yourself, what is the something I can do? Maybe you can't go visit them, but maybe you can make a phone call. Maybe you can send a card, And so we don't want to just get so rigid with our boundaries that we stop considering the options that are available that would mean something to people. But we need to do it because we have a heart that says, do this. And maybe that's the Holy Spirit saying, Carey, you need to do this. Pause, you need to do this. And following what the Holy Spirit is instructing us is going to be absolutely crucial for church leaders. And I think Andy Stanley said this one time, and it really stuck with me. Do for one what you wish you could do for all. But I would add to that and say, but don't stop doing it for the one. Don't let your leadership get to the place where you say, I will never go visit someone in the hospital. I never perform weddings. I never, attend that meeting. So we want boundaries to be effective communication tools. This is what I have to give, and this is what I don't have to give. But don't lose sight of giving something. And if your schedule really is so jam-packed that you can't care for the individual and you're only paying attention to the crowd, then you need to scale back some of the crowd ministry so that you can still have a heart for individual ministry.
Yeah, there's a connection, between that, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone, and even Dunbar's number, which is this idea that you can really only have 3 to 5 close friends and 10 to 15 friends and 150 people you know well. And I think there's a difference between that longtime member who's been there for a long, long time and the random person who showed up last Tuesday, right? You don't treat everybody quite the same way. So I completely agree with that.
If the Holy Spirit says that person that showed up on Tuesday, here's what I'm convinced of, Carey. When we get to heaven, I don't think Jesus is going to say, well done, good and faithful servant, because you reached 5,000 people on a weekly basis. I think the conversation is going to go a little more like this. Remember that random Tuesday where you stopped just for a few minutes and you walked out to the area where your church gives out the, bags of food, and you spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes just loving on that individual. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done.
So I agree with that. And yet to do that in something that's growing and not 10 people does mean that you categorically or consistently say no to a lot of things. Is that fair?
To some things, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think it's a conscious decision that I had to make a while ago as my organization grew, and I guess some people would say as my platform grew. Um, I had to intentionally look at the life of Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He ministered to the crowds, he ministered to small groups, and he ministered to the individual. And I dare not think that my platform has gotten so big where I lose sight of ministering to the individual, or I'm going to lose something very, very significant about being in ministry. So it's an
Absolutely.
intentional choice to arrange your schedule and your capacity so that you still have moments to be led by the Holy Spirit.
How do you do that?
Well, I say no to email. Yeah, I gave up email, and you would be surprised how much time that freed me up. I
Yeah, it does.
also my voicemail has been full since 2017, and I keep it full because I need to have white space in my life to pay attention to the Holy Spirit. That's absolutely crucial for me.
Good. Any other examples? Do you have any other guidelines about what you do, what you don't do these days as you manage your time?
Yeah, so like today I have a media day. I don't stack the media so full that I have no gaps in my schedule because I'm here at the office and I value personal relationships with the people that I work with. Now, I can't be best friends with all 70 employees, but if I have a 30-minute gap, I will order some chocolate chip cookies to be delivered, and I will personally, during that 30 minutes, walk around and interact with my staff because I love them and I want to do that. But that's not possible if I stack all of my meetings or all of my responsibilities minute by minute by minute. I intentionally leave some gaps so that I can be led to go have a conversation with this person or just go sit down in this leader's office and say, "Hey, I care about you. What's going on in your personal life? What is there something you need right now that our organization could help pay attention to for you?" And I just think that's important, super important.
Yeah. How do you know it's time to move from a boundary to a goodbye?
Well, going back to access and responsibility, if someone is consistently bringing zero responsibility, and I don't mean that they just made a mistake, we all make mistakes, and that's what grace is for. But I mean, if it's not a mistake, they're bringing zero responsibility, and it's a repetitive pattern of behavior, and it's something that they are unwilling or incapable of bringing more responsibility, then if their responsibility is a zero, take steps, not leaps. But you're going to have to reduce the access possibly down to a zero, not because you don't love them, but because you are acknowledging reality. And it's not walking away from another person if they're bringing zero responsibility and it's very consistent that they're bringing zero responsibility. You don't have to feel like you're walking away. You're acknowledging reality. You're responding to the pattern of behavior that is not healthy. And you're acknowledging this is not healthy. And it's okay to do that.
Can you give us a few signs of like zero responsibility? Because I think you're right. Most people, and that's the reason I'm kind of hard on stuff that we've been talking about, is most people do have good hearts and they're open. And perhaps sometimes they need to make more judicious choices. In other words, yeah, your time would be, you would have more margin because the other people who pay for a lack of boundaries is the people closest to you.
That's
It's your
right.
kids, right? It's your partner. It's the people closest to you because you're like, oh, I don't have time for dinner tonight because I'm out here doing this. So, what are some signs? Because I think you're right. Most people are good-hearted, and there's a fantastic couple of sections in the book, I think, where you look at misquoted scripture and scripts that you can use when you get put in tight situations. So, I recommend people pick it up. But can you give us an idea of just like, oh yeah, this is a line that got crossed, And this is probably more a goodbye than just because the boundary isn't working.
When you feel like you have to diminish the best of who you are to cover up for the worst of someone else, you need to pay attention to that. Throughout Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, I provide lists of self-awareness and reflection and consideration because sometimes it's better for us to see a list of questions and start considering some things than it is for us just to pull that out from within us. So these lists throughout Good Boundaries and Goodbyes are going to be really helpful and important for people. But also pay attention. Where are you starting to mentally say, I just can't take it anymore? Or, this is wearing me out, or I'm about to lose it on this person. Pay attention to that because where there's relational chaos, there's usually a lack of boundaries. And where there's a lack of boundaries, there's going to be dysfunction over time. And where there's dysfunction over time, that's going to be pretty detrimental to the relationship, especially if the relationship shifts from being difficult to destructive.
Well, there's a lot more in the book. Lysa, if people want to track with you online these days, tell us about the book, anything you've got going on. Congrats again on the launch. And I imagine this one was extremely difficult to write, but I'm really glad that you've done it.
Well, thank you, Carey. Yeah, it was hard to write because it's hard to live, I mean, just because we're having like a neat, tidy conversation around boundaries today, I acknowledge it's not easy, but it is worth it because better boundaries do lead to better relationships. And I've seen it happen in my own life. So people can track me on Instagram at Lysa TerKeurst. They can also find me on Facebook using my name as well. And then the book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Loving Others Without Losing the Best of Who You Are, it's available wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Lysa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carey.